conflict, the support of the overwhelming majority of people in the Middle East, most of whom are armed. I mean, it's very common in the Middle East for men to have weapons. Just saying, it seems like an absolutely crazy idea, and yet we're drifting there.
Well, it is. But if you looked at the prospect of the U.S. Goading Russia into a large scale conflict, that also looked insane. Yet they did it, and they continued to deepen themselves in that crisis rather than pull themselves out of it. And now they're doing the same thing in the Middle East, and they continue to provoke China in Asia Pacific. And one of the things that I think about when looking at this and considering how irrational it seems at face value, to them they feel it's now or never, because this time next year we will be weaker, we will be more isolated, Russia and China will be stronger, Iran will be stronger. If we just get the ball rolling, if we could just get a conflict going, there's a chance that something might go our way if we could just create some sort of order out of this chaos we create. We have the initiative because we're creating the chaos. Maybe something can come out of it. And if you think about a potential war with China, one of the things they have to do is disrupt maritime shipping around the globe, including in and out of the Middle East. So they're already positioned, ready to do that. And so I just get this ominous feeling that they feel they're out of time. They do not remember. They do not pay any price for this. The soldiers they send to go die, the civilians in the countries they target pay, but they themselves have not yet paid. So for them, it's now or never, and at what cost? No cost.
I mean, it has a sort of frenetic quality. Let's turn to China. I was reading a very interesting piece somewhere. I can't remember where, about a meeting that Barack Obama had with Xi Jinping. This is just as Xi Jinping assumed the leadership in China. And the story that we have always heard is that Obama said to Xi Jinping, let's demilitarize the South China Sea. And Xi Jinping said yes, but then didn't follow through. Well, we've now learned that actually that meeting did happen. And what happened was the diametric opposite. That it was Xi Jinping who said to Barack Obama, let's demilitarize the South China Sea. Barack Obama actually at the meeting said no. So this idea never really, never really flew. But again, constant misrepresentation of what goes on in diplomatic discussions is always going to erode trust, which again, people in the US never seem to understand. But let's come back to the South China Sea. Going to war with Iran is a crazy idea. Going to war with Russia is a crazy idea. Going to war with China is stark raving bananas. I mean, it is off the scale insane. We've talked about Russia's ability to outproduce the United States in artillery shells. China's ability to do that is orders of magnitude greater. You only have to look at the steel production figures, which I seem to remember we discussed in another program that we did together. I mean, the Chinese dwarf the US in terms of manufacturing. And one of the things that people don't understand is that 2023, Chinese manufacturing grew, despite all the talk about economic collapse in China, whereas despite all the talk about the Biden boom in the United States, manufacturing output in the United States shrank. So how are you going to face off against China? I mean, I'm not a tactical person, but you're going to send all of these warships into harm's way. I mean, it just doesn't even bear thinking of.
And to achieve what? So what they're actually trying to do is provoke a conflict either in the South China Sea or over the status of Taiwan. And again, if people don't know, go to the State Department's official website. Yeah. It is not a country. And the U.S. officially does not recognize its independence. It is officially considered a province of China, and yet the U.S. has a troop presence there. They arm Taiwan against the wishes of Beijing, and their military is constantly exercising around Taiwan, and they're increasing their presence in the Philippines. They're preparing to use the Philippines as a proxy. They want Japan to stand in as a proxy. They're getting Australia ready to act as a proxy. They have spent decades trying to overthrow governments here in Southeast Asia to at least isolate China, if not transform countries here in Southeast Asia into belligerent proxies against China. So this is something that they've been trying to put together for a long time, and now they're out of time. And if you look at even countries like Japan, South Korea, even more practical people on the island of Taiwan themselves, they don't want war with China. They like working with China. They are making money. Development is taking place for Japan and South Korea, especially because of U.S. attempts to cut China off from semiconductor technology. They have huge investments in China. They're losing billions of dollars because of this. There are U.S. companies that are losing billions of dollars because now they're not allowed to do business with China. And what is China doing anyway? They're circumventing all of these attempts to isolate them and impede their technological progress. They're putting out chips that they're supposedly not supposed to be able to produce. And again, it goes back to fundamentals. Look at the fundamentals of Chinese society. It's not China of the 1980s or the 1950s. It is a bigger population, industrial base, education system, human resource pool. They're going to do this. And if you know Chinese people more closely and you understand the century of humiliation that they went through because of U.S. and European colonization, there's almost nothing that they wouldn't do to prevail in this. Remember, the U.S. crossing the entire Pacific Ocean to pick a fight with China. and I was just listening. There's a friend of my channel that sends me many clips in private from all of these think tanks, and there were U.S. Air Force officials and acquisition officers talking about how they need to overcome the fact that they're trying to fight China on the other side of the Pacific, and it never occurred to them that why are we doing this in the first place? It doesn't make any sense at all. And so
I have to say, putting it like that also reminds me of what you said about the attacking Crimea with a river crossing in the way. It's like attacking a superpower that is industrially far stronger than you, with putting an ocean, the Pacific Ocean, in the way. I mean, it makes no military strategic sense at all. And yesterday, I had a conversation with Sofia Midkiff. I don't know. Well, our viewers probably know her. She's Chinese and she follows Chinese affairs extremely closely. And she made a point to me, which I did not know, which is that the basis of the rapprochement of the United States and China are 3 communiques that were signed over a fairly long period. And the third communique, which was signed by Ronald Reagan, no less, in the 1980s between China and the United States, committed the United States in writing to reducing its arms sales to Taiwan. The United States was supposed to, over time, bring the amount of weapons it was supplying to Taiwan to 0. And of course, it's actually now going in the opposite direction. There's a talk about a $10 billion arms build-up sale to Taiwan, supposedly to rearm the Taiwanese army. And of course, again, the Chinese point this out, and they come up against this wall of denials and evasions and assurances that the United States still supports the one China policy, and everybody can see that it is the opposite. So again, reckless belligerence. I'm going to say what it all reminds me of. I mean, I'm talking now, historical time. You talk about the fact that they feel that they're running out of time. That was very much the feeling in Berlin in the run-up to the First World War. They could see the industrial growth of Russia. They sensed that things were, beginning to, the Germany's opportunity to establish itself as the great new world power was fading. And so they decided to go for broke, and they started a world war, which ended, of course, in their defeat and in the collapse of Europe, and a collapse from which, in some respects, Europe has never recovered. But anyway, it's eerie to see all of that being repeated all over again.
And think about what the U.S. did to Russia, the expansion of NATO up to its borders, the Minsk agreements, the fact that we now have French and German leaders admitting that it was just a ruse to buy time to arm Ukraine. And then when we look at China is obviously watching all of this, and they're taking notes about how the U.S. is violating these communiques that they signed and were supposed to uphold. And just think about how in the Western world, because of the Western media and the way they spin everything, how ordinary people honestly believe that it's China somehow bullying Taiwan, which is not even a country. But I swear, go read the BBC. They will never mention it in any of their articles that Taiwan is not a country. They never mention one way or the other, and they use that ambiguity to deceive people. And so this is how they're keeping this whole thing going. And this brings me back to Eric Schmidt and his little think tank about keeping the US on top of China. I just wonder, when you've got a clean piece of paper out and you're doing the tally, US population versus China's industrial base, everything, when you're adding everything up and you see how many advantages, how China has all of the advantages, what are you adding to the US column that makes you think somehow all of those advantages don't matter? And it's this supremacist mindset that we have seen in the West for generations, and unfortunately it's still prevalent today. And between that and their sense of impunity, what incentive do they have to join the human race and work together with people rather than attempting to continue subjugating them? They're stuck. They're stuck in the past, and it's going to take a serious jolt to wake them up. And one last thing I want to add on this point is that you can see the multipolar world being very patient. They're being very patient. They're exercising tremendous restraint. They don't want a catastrophic conflict to destroy everything that they've built. And in many ways, I just fear that the U.S. will seek to go to the extreme, burn everything down, and hope that they can rebuild faster than everybody else. I like a Doctor Strange love sort of scenario. That's my greatest fear. I don't have any evidence to substantiate that fear, but I just want, because why else? They have no chance of succeeding. Why are they doing this?
I agree. Well, Brian, I think this is where I'm going to stop. I'm going to hand over to Alex. Probably we have some questions that could be put to you. And Alex, over to you.
Yeah, let's get to some questions real quick. Sparky says, great to see Brian on the Duran. Curious Enthusiast asks, Brian, when China is pioneering the social credit system and Putin is considering one of the absolute best allies, and Putin is considered one of the best absolute allies by Zionists, is it not ideal to be painting them as a lesser of two evils? It's two wings of the same exact UN bird.
There's no social credit system, so this person is extremely misinformed, and this story of a social credit system came out of the Western corporate media. So you got that story from the very people you seem to think you're opposed to. You need to become a little bit more informed. I've done a whole video, by the way, on the social credit system, where even the articles accusing China of having the system admit in the body of the articles that it doesn't exist. So I don't know how carefully this person researched it. I've been to China, and I know many people from China, and I know many people in China here in Thailand. So and I asked them all about social credit system. They have no idea what I'm talking about.
And on the question of Putin, his relationship with Netanyahu and has completely broken down now. I mean, they've had 2 telephone conversations since the events on the 7th of October, and apparently both of them were very tense. There wasn't actual shouting, but apparently it didn't go. Neither went very well. And if you follow events closely in the UN, it's the Russians who have been leading the demands for a ceasefire and who've been most critical of what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. So that entire relationship has essentially collapsed.
And I would just add that a lot of countries have relationships with Israel. Does not mean that they're endorsing Zionism or even the current administration in power in Israel. People have to remember that Russian, Chinese, even Turkey, their diplomatic outreach is sophisticated, it is mature, and they don't just on a whim or because of emotions cut ties and not. They know that you have to talk US and Europe, they're the only ones that talk in absolutes and cut off diplomatically nations and not talk. They're the ones that do that, and you can see what the outcome of that. Nations have to talk more even when they disagree. And so an association between Russia and Israel, or China and Israel, really, what does that mean? Does that mean that they endorse everything that they're doing and vice versa? I really don't think so. We have to be a little more sophisticated the way we examine these relationships.
MyInfo asks, Brian, what about the use of WeChat in China? You have to pay via WeChat for everything. It's not social credit system, but you have to have a mobile and a payment system in your phone for your person.
If you use WeChat, does everyone in China have to use WeChat? No. So again, ask yourself where you're getting this information. If it's coming from the Western media, why do we all agree that they're lying about absolutely everything else, but China's the one thing they're telling the truth about? I guarantee you that they aren't. And if you're going to YouTube channels where the Western media has entrenched themselves further back because no one trusts them, so they go to these YouTube channels and they put out information there. Again, do your own research. Think for yourselves. We're supposed to be open-minded and question everything. We don't like China. Why don't we like China? Ask yourself that, and ask yourself if there's a rational reason for that. And your fears about China, where did they come from? And start from there. Actually, start asking yourself why you're so critical of a place you've never been before.
Curious Enthusiast asks, China became as powerful as it did because America and most of Europe gave most of their infrastructure to China. You really think that China isn't grateful for that? They all still share diplomacy.
Well, again, they do. The Chinese are about diplomacy, but this constant idea that people have that China became powerful and strong because somehow, we helped them to, we lifted them up to this level. It completely underestimates and is entirely wrong about China. China became strong because it is big and large, and it has a hugely educated population with enormous industrial and entrepreneurial skills for most of its existence. And the Chinese state is the oldest state in the world, by the way, just saying. For most of its existence, China has been the world's richest and most powerful country, and it is becoming that again. This is simply a return, actually, to the historic norm. It doesn't seem like that to us because our history, our knowledge of history is fairly shallow. We don't really see much beyond the 19th century. But if you follow Chinese history overall, you would see that is true. And my wife was a student at Caius University, Caius College in Cambridge, and one of the fellows at Caius wrote this. Man called John Needham wrote this huge book, a huge series of things about China, science and technology in China throughout the whole period of Chinese history. And it gives you a staggering picture of Chinese industrial and technological and scientific innovations throughout Chinese history. Gunpowder, compass, all of those things, they're just printing. They're just the tip of it. So as I said, don't underestimate China or think that it only got to where it is because of the grace of the West. It wasn't like that at all.
And again, if you've ever been to China and you see with your eyes how hardworking people are there, they did that themselves, and they did that despite the West, not because of the West. The West was in the process of colonizing China. So it was their own hard work. It was their own sense of self-preservation and their own desire to restore their country back to its dignity. That is the reason why China is the way it is today. It's not, and looking at China today, they have things that don't even exist in the West. So where did they steal that from? I mean, there's this misconception that if a non-white society has something great, they surely had to have stolen it from white people. And it's 2024, and we got to grow up and wake up and move past that.
Michael Morris says, this is one of the big problems about media on China and Russia. We have been fed assumptions which when we weren't paying attention, it stuck, sadly. So admittedly, I have wiped old assumptions. However, it would be nice to get balanced reporting from China, the rough with the smooth. There's always some rough, so let's have it. We
Oh,
all do. We all do in various degrees, no biggie.
Oh, absolutely. And if you go to China, I mean, I was there in 2017, and to give an example, there was still in those days an awful lot of pollution in Chinese cities. I understand that problem has significantly abated since then. But one of the things that, again, surprised me was the open way in which people were complaining about it. So, yes, there are lots of things in China, undoubtedly, which are wrong. And, I'm not saying I don't know China with the depth that would be necessary to sort of do a breakdown and discuss and identify its problems and the faults in its society. But of course they exist. But the problem is, if we're talking about the rough and the smooth, in the West we only get the rough magnified by several times, and we never get the smooth.
Another China question from Ronald B. Is China's birth rate now collapsing? And if so, doesn't that imply a collapse of Chinese influence in a few decades? The birth rate.
Look, any demographic problem China has, the West has had for much longer, and is by far much worse. And the West is by far less equipped to deal with it than China. China is able to organize itself on a level the West cannot. And if they are determined to overcome this problem, they will. Same goes for Russia. Russia's, demographic, they're surpassing us, but don't worry, because they'll kill them, so they'll all die on their own. I mean, this is clutching at straws. And you have to ask yourself, where did these narratives come from? Why am I repeating them?
Sparky says, build a better world with BRICS. Commando Crossfire would love to see joint BRICS space program, the moon, question mark. Do you know anything about space programs?
Well, I think the Chinese and the Russians are talking about a joint moon program. So, I mean,
Yes.
we're already seeing evidence of it. So, I think that some country, India has its own space program, and I think they would like to develop it a bit first before they pulled with the more established space powers, China and Russia. But the Chinese and the Russians are already working together in space, and they will do so more of it, I'm sure.
Brian,
and for people who don't know, the Chinese space program, their launch cadence is either on par or surpassing the United States. They were excluded from the International Space Station, so they built their own. And Russia built at least a significant portion of the International Space Station, really made it possible to do that. And because they're having this fallout with the West, they'll join China in the future, and so they'll move on together, and the West will just keep doing what they're doing. Self-inflicted implosion.
Jungle Jin says, what do you make of the incident with busker Brendan Kavanaugh and the CCP members at the Elton John piano at the St. Pancras railway station? Is this, Jungle Chin, is that the YouTube video that's gone viral?
Yeah, I agree.
Chinese tourists telling him to stop?
Well,
video?
Yes, I haven't seen this video, but isn't this about people being photographed or something?
Yeah, like Chinese tourists or something telling him to stop filming his YouTube video, something like that. Have you guys heard about this?
You have to, if it's an anti-China channel and they go to China and they look for trouble, because the BBC does this all the time. They'll go in the middle of the road and start filming, and the police will be like, "You're going to get hit by a car," so they try to get them onto the sidewalk, and the BBC will edit the frame to make it look like the Chinese police are just dragging them away from a news story. And when you see the entire clip, and then you see how they edit it, it's such a deliberate attempt. So again, if you have any doubts, just go to China. You're able to go to China. There's no restriction to go to China. Go there, see for yourself. I guarantee you'll be blown away by what you see, and it's not going to be what you expected.
Hello, Angelo. Thank you for that. Super chat. Axel O says, thoughts on Texas constitutional border crisis? Brian and Alexander, You have any
Yeah.
thoughts on what's going on in Texas?
Well,
Have you been following the developments?
I have been following the developments, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm up to speed with all of this and with all the minutiae and all the rest. But if it is indeed the case that Texas, or at least the government of Texas, are defying a decision of the Supreme Court of the United States, then I think that's an extremely dangerous development indeed. And it would start peeling away, if it were to continue, the federal process in the United States. I think people in Texas need to take a step back and think very carefully about what they're doing. This is my own view. If people want to argue with it and explain why I'm wrong, I'll read and listen very carefully to what they say. But I find this unnerving, even if you don't agree with this decision. Think carefully about what you are going to achieve if you straightforwardly defy it. My sense is that probably the government in Texas understands that very well, and they won't want to lose control of the Texas National Guard, and they'll go through the motion of defying it, and then will quietly, when they can, accept it.
It's hard to tell where political sideshows and distractions end and actual American dysfunction and division begins, because the border issue has always been a wedge issue that governments have used to distract people. Why are all these people coming over the border in the first place? Because over the decades, the U.S. has decimated the Americas. They've stirred them up, divided them, overthrown them with coups, and all the U.S. has to do is stop doing that, be a good neighbor, assist in actual real development, and you wouldn't even have a border problem. So this has always been an issue they've used to hype people up, get them scared, and get them paying attention to that rather than just the wholesale exploitation of the U.S. its resources to build empire overseas.